The sky was the color of scorched tin, low and heavy, the kind that made a woman listen harder to the wind. Esther Laveau stood by her fence, axe in hand, the last of the wood split and stacked beneath the lean-to. Her shoulders ached, but she'd learned not to listen to that. Pain was just proof the work had been done right. A storm had been riding the horizon since morning. Now it came fast over the plains, prairie grass flattened in waves, and dust curled in devilish spirals along the path that led to her land. The mule paced near the barn, uneasy. Birds had gone silent. She wiped sweat from her neck with the sleeve of her dress and looked toward the tree-line. Something was wrong with the way the wind moved, like it was pushing something forward, something it didn't want. Then she saw him, a figure slumped against the saddle, barely upright. The horse was stumbling, foam at its mouth, rider barely tethered to life. Esther took one step forward, hand tightening around the axe handle. The man was hurt, or worse. She wasn't foolish. Mercy had a price out here. She waited, watched him fall. The rider collapsed sideways, face first into the dirt just short of her fence line. The horse whinnied and backed away, limping, then stood still like it had delivered something it hadn't meant to. Esther didn't move, not for a long minute. Then she walked slowly, deliberately, toward the body. He was bleeding from the side. A deep wound, not fresh. Flies had already begun to gather. His coat, dust-colored, torn at the shoulder, hung open, revealing a shirt clotted with old blood and road dust. He reeked of whiskey and metal. His lips moved. She leaned down just enough to hear. "Forgive me, not her fault," he whispered. Esther's jaw tightened. She should walk away. She should leave him for the vultures or let the next storm finish the job. But the word sat wrong in her chest. She didn't believe in coincidence. And she didn't believe in angels. But something about the way he said it made her see a bruise on her own past, fresh again. She hauled him up under one shoulder with a grunt, dragging him across the fence line and through the gate, toward the narrow porch of her cabin. Her arms trembled under the weight, but her face didn't show it. Inside, the house was clean and silent. Oil lamp already lit on the table, its soft flame catching the copper pans on the wall. She kicked the door shut behind her, then rolled the stranger onto her only cot. She had laid her daddy on this bed before he passed. Now this man lay there, half dead and muttering sins to the ceiling. She unbuttoned his shirt. The wound was jagged, looked like a bullet had skimmed his ribs and tore deep through the meat. Not recent, but angry and unclean. She took a knife and cut the fabric away, poured clean water into a basin and found her lye soap. When she touched the cloth to his side, he spasmed like a man waking from hell. His eyes opened, gray eyes, not clear, not safe, but not cruel either. "You gonna finish me?" he rasped. "If I was," she said, "you wouldn't be talking." He gave a huff of breath that might have been a laugh, might have been pain. He passed out again. She stitched him with clean hands and little mercy. He needed the pain, she told herself. Let it root him here in the living. By the time she was done, thunder had rolled right up to her doorstep. Esther took her place on the porch, shotgun across her knees, eyes scanning the darkening land like she expected it to rise up and accuse her. Inside, the man groaned again in his sleep. She didn't ask his name. Names made things stay longer than they should. When dawn broke, it broke red. He woke with a grunt, sat up too fast, and pressed a hand to his side. "Where?" "You're in my house. Don't get any ideas about it." He looked around, blinking at the modest room. Cast iron stove, shelves of dried herbs and pickled roots, a rocking chair older than both of them. His eyes landed on the door, then flicked to her. "I'll go. You'll bleed out." He looked down at himself. Bandage clean and tight. Clothes washed, drying on the back of a chair. His eyes narrowed. "You stitched me. I ain't about to let someone die on my floor. Doesn't mean I want you here. I didn't ask for saving." She stood. "And yet here you are." He tried to rise and hissed through his teeth. Sat back down. "What town is this?" he asked. "This ain't town. Nearest is Clifton Ridge, 4 miles yonder. And before you ask, no, I ain't taking you there. You can limp there when you can stand." He said nothing. Esther brought him a bowl, of cornmeal mush. She set it on the table, then turned away. He stared at it like it might bite him, then forced himself up and limped toward it. He sat with a sigh, ate slow, careful. She watched from the window. "What's your name?" he asked. She didn't answer, just said, "Eat." Lightning cracked in the distance. The wind shifted again, carried voices. Hoofbeats. Esther's eyes sharpened. "You bring company?" "I don't know," he said. "I lost them days ago." She grabbed the shotgun. 3 riders approached from the east trail, slow and wide across the field. She could tell by the way they sat their saddles. They were hunting, not visiting. "Get down," she said. He did. She stepped onto the porch. The riders stopped just out of range. "Morning," called one. White man, narrow eyes, clean vest too fine for the dust he rode in. "Trouble sleeping?" Esther said coldly. "We're looking for a man. Hurt. Took a horse from our ranch near Elwood." "Don't know him," she said. "You sure?" "Might have wandered through." "Nothing wanders through here but foxes and wind." A long pause. The second man, older, leaned forward in the saddle. "This your land?" "It is." "You alone?" She lifted the shotgun. "I prefer it that way." The leader smirked. "Well, if you see a man with a stitched side and a mouth full of lies, let us know." "I surely will," she said. They turned and rode off slow, heads twisting, checking windows, porches, trails. She watched them vanish into the dust. Inside, the man stood by the table, pale. "You know them?" she asked. "I know what they are. Doesn't matter what names they use." She crossed her arms. "You got a bounty on your head?" "Maybe." "That true?" He met her eyes. "You saved me. I won't bring death to your door. I'll leave by nightfall. You won't get far." He gave a tight smile. "Then maybe I won't go far." Silence hung between them. She walked over, poured herself coffee, sipped it. Then, quietly, "You want to pay me for the stitching?" He nodded. "I got nothing left but thanks." "Then sit down. You can chop wood once that wound stops whining." He looked at her, this woman with a spine of iron and hands like soil, and something in his shoulders let go. They sat at the table, neither speaking. The wind outside had calmed, but something heavier had just begun. And far off, behind the hills, the men who'd ridden off weren't done riding. The next morning came with the brittle silence of a world waiting to pass judgment. Esther stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching Boaz split wood with one good arm and the awkward rhythm of a man pretending he wasn't in pain. The gash along his ribs tugged with every swing, but he never paused long enough to groan. That told her something about him. He'd suffered worse, and done it quietly. She didn't thank him. She just set out a plate of food on the crate by the door and went back inside. She wasn't about to pretend this was normal. Nothing about it was. By midday, she could feel the shift in the air again. Not storm this time, but scrutiny. A presence pressing in around the edges of her land like smoke. When she looked out toward the trail, she saw a figure walking up on foot. Not a rider, not a threat, but a reckoning all the same. Moses Granger, tall and lean in his preacher's coat, walked like he had right to weigh souls. He'd been born in chains, found God in the war, and spent the years since trying to civilize Clifton Ridge one sermon and suspicion at a time. Folks feared him more than they feared law. Esther opened the door before he could knock. "Morning, Sister Laveau. You came a long way for a greeting." Moses gave a slow nod. "Word travels. A man's been seen at your place. Strange one. Walks like he's been hunted." "I don't keep prisoners, Brother Moses." "No, but you're keeping company." She didn't answer. Her hands were calloused, but they tightened around the doorframe like it might give her a reason to slam it. "You know what they'll say," Moses continued, "that a man spent the night under your roof, that your curtains were drawn, that your oil burned after midnight." She laughed once. Cold. Didn't know God kept curfew. Moses's face didn't flinch. "I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to help protect what little name you've carved in this place. I earned this land, and you can lose it, fast. A single whisper of sin can turn folks cruel, especially when it's a black woman holding property and a stranger in her bed." "He wasn't in my bed." But they don't care. She stepped outside and shut the door behind her. Boaz, still splitting wood, paused and watched from the corner of his eye. "What are you asking, Moses?" "You know what I'm asking." She stared at him. The silence stretched long enough for the wind to shift again. "You want me to marry a man I don't know," she said flatly. It would end the talk. It would start a lie. A lie they'll swallow easier than scandal. Boaz walked up, leaning slightly on the axe handle. He nodded at Moses, then turned to Esther. "Is this about me?" She didn't answer. Moses did. "She sheltered you. That alone will mark her. Town's already gritting its teeth." Boaz looked down at the dust between his boots. "Then back up." "Then I'll go." Moses frowned. "If you walk now, they'll say she tempted you, and you fled her shame. If you stay, they'll say she trapped you. If you marry her, they'll say the Lord's work is done, and move on to someone else." Boaz's mouth opened slightly, then closed. He looked at Esther. "What do you want?" he asked her. Her eyes were flat and unreadable. "I want to go on living in peace." "This wouldn't be peace," he said gently. "It'd be a bargain with rope around both our necks." She didn't blink. "I've made worse deals." They stared at each other. Dust circled their feet. Somewhere behind them, the chicken squawked. Finally, Moses gave a small, almost sorrowful nod. "Come to town at dusk. I'll say the words myself. Bring a witness if you want. Sheriff will sign it. After that, they'll leave you alone." He tipped his hat, turned, and walked off. Boaz exhaled, long and quiet. "You don't have to do this." Esther shook her head. "You think this is about you? I think I brought danger here. I think I owe you my distance." "You think leaving makes me cleaner?" she snapped. "A man slept under my roof. That's the end of it. Doesn't matter if we touched or not. Doesn't matter if I was reading Psalms with a pistol on the table. I let you in." His voice was low, raw. "I didn't mean to bring ruin." "Then don't run." That night, they walked into Clifton Ridge side by side. She wore her Sunday dress, deep plum, faded at the sleeves. Her hair was wrapped in a white cloth. Boaz wore his mended shirt and a coat borrowed from the back wall. He looked more like a man riding into judgment than a groom. Town was waiting. Not on porches, not in pews, but behind curtains and half-cracked doors. The sheriff met them outside the chapel. He nodded once. "You sure?" "No one's sure," Esther replied. "But we're here." Inside, the chapel was dimly lit. Moses stood before the pulpit, book open. No music, no flowers, just wood creaking under old feet and paper-thin promises. "Do you, Boaz Cutter, take this woman to be lawfully wed?" Boaz didn't look at Esther. He looked down, then up at the cross above Moses's head. "I do." "And do you, Esther Laveau, take this man?" She hesitated. "Then I do." The words felt like bricks tumbling into place around her ribs. "You are wed in the eyes of God and this township," Moses said. "Go forth in unity, and be quiet in your ways." The only sound after that was the signing of a paper, the scratch of pen on parchment, and the echo of boots on old floorboards as they left. Boaz didn't touch her as they walked back. He didn't speak until they reached her porch again. "I'll sleep in the barn." "No," she said. He looked surprised, then hopeful, then confused. "You'll sleep in the house, on the floor, near the door." He gave a small nod. "Understood." She went inside, stripped the sheets off the cot, and laid out a pallet on the floor. She didn't look at him once. When she entered her own room, she bolted the door behind her and sat on the edge of the bed, breath ragged. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, from something worse, recognition. She had seen the same eyes once in her mirror, years ago, when she stood at her mother's grave and promised not to be used by anyone again. Now here she was, wearing a ring that meant silence, bearing a name not her own. She slept like a woman in a war tent, boots still on, spine straight, gun on the nightstand. At some point near dawn, she heard him moving around the house. Not stealing, not leaving, just pacing. Like a cage thing. She stared at the ceiling and counted his steps. By morning, the house was quiet again. He was still there, and she still didn't know what that meant. Out in the town, the whispers had already begun to die, but what they'd left behind would take longer to fade. It had been 6 days since the wedding no one celebrated. Each morning began the same. Boaz rose early and fed the mule, split firewood, swept the porch. Esther cooked in silence, her back to him. They passed the days like strangers, sharing a secret neither could speak aloud. But something was shifting. She'd caught herself watching him work. How he favored one side when lifting. How he muttered to himself in Cherokee now and then. How he never quite let the door close behind him without glancing back at her. He spoke little, but he listened. Listened like he was afraid to miss the one word that might save him. Esther didn't trust quiet men. They usually carried the loudest ghosts. But she couldn't deny he moved through her world with care. He never touched anything he hadn't been invited to. He never stepped past her silence. That evening, as dusk painted the horizon with the bruised color of old fire, Esther stood behind the barn, stringing up herbs. Boaz sat sharpening a hatchet on the porch. The air smelled of sage and wood smoke. "You ever going to ask me what I did?" he said suddenly, without looking up. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready," she replied. He nodded, slow. "What if I'm never ready? Then I guess I never know." He studied the edge of the blade. "It ain't noble what brought me here. I never thought it was. I've been called a deserter, a thief, a murderer. Depends who you ask." She didn't move. Boaz went on. "During the war, I scouted terrain for men who did worse things than I had the stomach for. I walked with killers, rode with them. Some days I pointed out the roads they should ride to take a town fast. Some days I kept my mouth shut and prayed it wouldn't be a slaughter. And after the war," he looked up, "I stopped praying." Esther finished hanging the last bundle and turned. "So what are you now?" "I don't know. Lost mostly. Angry some days. Grateful others." "Grateful for what?" "For this porch, this roof, this woman who hasn't shot me yet." She almost smiled. He stood, wiping a blade on his trouser leg. "You think this marriage is real? It's paper and names. That's all." "Don't feel like just paper to me," he said softly. She met his gaze. "Then stop calling it pretend." That night, thunder rumbled in the far distance, but no rain came. In bed, she lay still and listened to the sounds of him breathing on the floor behind the door. There was something steady about it, like wind rocking through pine trees. She realized she hadn't locked the door in 3 nights, and he hadn't tried it once. By the 3rd week, Boaz had built a fence around the garden, mended the shed roof, and even taught her mule to follow voice commands. He spoke more easily now, though still with caution, as if he believed each word could be the one to get him sent away. They shared dinner in a rhythm. She poured, he passed bread. They never prayed aloud, but they both paused before eating. One evening, after helping deliver a neighbor's breech-born calf, Esther returned home in blood-streaked sleeves and a face like carved stone. She sat down on the porch step without a word. Boaz handed her a tin cup of water. She drank. "I lost the mama," she said. He nodded, quiet. "I did everything right. Everything. But sometimes right ain't enough." He sat beside her. "Sometimes it isn't." She looked at him sideways. "You ever lose someone that way?" He swallowed. "I lost a girl once. Not in birth. Just in the way you lose a thing you weren't allowed to keep." Esther didn't ask more. She didn't need to. That was the first night she didn't close her bedroom door. 2 days later, trouble came back. A man rode into Clifton Ridge with a red kerchief around his neck and a bounty poster folded in his saddlebag. He asked about a drifter with a stitched up side, said he was trailing a man who turned against his own riders, stolen a horse, and left 2 dead behind him. Said he had a name, Boaz Cutter. The sheriff's hands itched to stay clean, but the townsfolk had long memories and no appetite for sheltering fugitives, not even married ones. The next morning, a note was pinned to Esther's fence post with a hunting knife. "Ask your husband about the blood on his boots. You would a ghost with enemies." Boaz found it first. He pulled the blade free and stood still, staring at the message. Then he burned it in the stove. Esther watched him. "You brought something here. I tried to leave it behind." "You didn't." He looked tired. "Do you want me to go?" "I want the truth." He sat at the table and folded his hands like he was about to confess to a preacher. The men I rode with after the war, call them bounty men, call them raiders, weren't just chasing coin. They hunted freedmen, deserters, and anyone who refused to kneel to their version of law. I rode with them too long. I got good at surviving. Too good. Esther's face didn't move. Then one day, we came across a camp. A family. Black man, white wife, 2 kids. They said the man was a runaway. He wasn't. He had papers. Didn't matter. They dragged him out anyway. Said the land was stolen. Said the bloodline was filth. He paused. His jaw clenched. I drew my weapon. I pointed it at the men I'd called brothers. Told them I'd kill the first one that moved. I held that gun until the family fled into the woods. Then I shot the horse of the man who raised his rifle. And I ran. And the men who followed you, they never stopped. Esther sat down across from him. The kerosene lamp between them flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. I ain't clean, Boaz said, but I walked away from something foul. If that makes me hunted, so be it. She studied him. The lines around his mouth, the scar along his neck, the wear in his eyes. I was born hunted, she said, and I built peace here with my own hands. You step 1 inch out of line, I'll put you in the dirt. He nodded, solemn. That's fair. Outside, a coyote cried in the hills. Later that night, while Esther slept, Boaz stood on the porch with the shotgun in his hands and watched the tree line. His face was calm, but his hands were ready. He wasn't running anymore. By morning, hoof prints circled the edge of the property. Fresh, not from any animal he knew. Esther found them too. She didn't say a word. The silence between them now wasn't cold. It was sharpened. They began moving the food stores from the front shed into the root cellar. Boaz reinforced the door with an old iron rod. Esther cleaned and loaded the second rifle she hadn't touched in 3 years. At sundown, they sat at the table again. This time, she poured 2 cups of whiskey and handed one to him. To whatever this is, she said. He raised his cup. To what it becomes. They drank. She looked at him. If they come again, I won't run, he said. Not from you. Not from this. She believed him. And for the first time since the wedding, she slept with the door open wide and the rifle resting at the foot of her bed. The fire was already burning when Esther smelled it. Not the clean burn of oak logs or the acrid crackle of grease in a pan, but smoke thick with tar and anger. She sat up straight in bed, heart thudding once, hard. Then she was moving, bare feet on the wooden floor, rifle already in hand. Boaz was already at the front window, crouched low. His voice was calm, but his eyes were fire-lit. They set the shed, he said. Just the shed. Not the house, yet. She joined him, looked out. A red smear pulsed against the horizon. Her shed, the one she'd built with reclaimed timber, was engulfed, fire climbing its spine like a curse. Shadows moved near the edge of the flames, 3 figures on horseback, watching their work like artists admiring a painting. Esther's mouth was a thin line. It's a warning. No, Boaz said. It's an invitation. They didn't speak again. They both knew what came next. In the quiet minutes that followed, they packed what they needed. Water, ammunition, salt, bandages. Boaz moved with a grim precision. Esther moved like a woman placing candles at a funeral. The men hadn't come closer. Not yet. They were waiting for fear to do their work. But fear had no place in her house. Esther stepped outside first, rifle against her shoulder, eyes sweeping the trees. The smoke stung her nose, but didn't slow her. I know you're out there, she called. You want blood? Come try and take it. A laugh rose from the trees. Then a voice she recognized, dry, arrogant, southern, with a twist of menace. Mrs. Laveau, you're still brave. Maybe too brave. Eli Drummond stepped forward from the dark, flanked by 2 men on horseback. He wore a red neckerchief, his long coat too fine for honest work. He tipped his hat. You married the wrong ghost, he said, and now you're standing on borrowed time. Boaz emerged behind her, quiet and steady. Drummond grinned wider. Well, Cutter. Didn't expect you to wear a ring. Marriage suits you. But I gotta admit, I miss the man who left bodies, not breadcrumbs. Boaz didn't flinch. I stopped running, Eli. And I started hunting, Drummond said. That's how this works. You already lit a fire. If you came for more, you should have brought hell. The men on horseback began to fan out. Esther adjusted her grip on the rifle. You got no claim here, she said sharply. No warrant. No right. This is my land. Drummond's eyes narrowed. Justice don't need a paper signature. I carry it right here. He tapped the butt of his pistol. Boaz stepped forward, just enough to draw every eye. She didn't choose me to make peace with this world, Eli. She chose me because I'm the one man left who ain't afraid to bury it. Lightning split the sky behind them. Thunder rolled seconds later. Eli's grin faltered. The moment broke like glass. The rider on the left fired first, shot whistling past Esther's shoulder. She dropped to one knee and returned fire. The shot cracked, echoed, and the rider tumbled off his horse with a scream. The animal reared and bolted. Boaz rushed the second rider, catching him off guard. They collided near the burning shed, both hitting the dirt. The rider drew his knife, slashing wildly, but Boaz rolled, grabbing a smoldering brand from the ground and driving it hard into the man's face. The scream was short, then silence. Drummond backed up fast, pistol drawn. Esther stood now, unshaken, rifle aimed directly at him. You want to die like this? She called out. You want your name buried under ash and mud? He didn't answer. You think this land forgives men like you, she said. It doesn't. It keeps you. It remembers. Every woman you called dirty. Every child you made an orphan. Every fire you lit like it meant something. Boaz came up beside her, blood on his hands, sweat pouring down. Let him speak, he murmured. Let him pick his end. Drummond stared between them. His hand twitched. I won't be put in the dirt by a traitor and a whore, he spat. The shot cracked from Esther's rifle. Drummond staggered, then fell forward, a neat hole in the center of his chest. For a moment, there was only the sound of burning wood and the wind picking up dust. Boaz knelt beside the body, checked the pulse, then nodded once. It's done. No, Esther said. It's just beginning. They buried the bodies that night in the north field, unmarked graves under cold stars. No words were said. None were needed. Boaz cleaned the tools while Esther sat on the porch, legs tucked beneath her, rifle across her lap. Her hands no longer trembled. Her shoulders had settled. When he joined her, she looked at him long and hard. I need to ask you something, she said. Anything. Why didn't you run? He took a long breath. Because I got tired of choosing silence. And because you didn't flinch when they came. I ain't had a reason to stay anywhere. Until you. She nodded slowly. Then tell me plain. What are you now? He looked out at the land, the fence line, the trail they'd once feared. Then he looked at her. I'm your husband, he said. Not just in name. Not just in paper. In fire. In vow. If you'll still have me. Esther didn't speak for a moment. Then she leaned against his shoulder. I already chose you, she said. Now I just choose again. In the distance, the sun began to rise, slow and gold over the blackened fields. Smoke drifted, soft now, not angry. The land had taken its due. The wind carried no whispers, only breath and dust and quiet. They would rebuild, together, and no man would question the truth again. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.